Hey, I'm Tamara Khandaker, and you're listening to The Decibel from the Globe and Mail. So when Annamie Paul won the election to lead the Green Party last October, she became the first Black person elected to lead any federal party, and it was called a historic moment in Canadian politics, and it made international headlines.
We as Greens, once again, are leading the way. We have done something that has never been done before in Canadian politics.
There was a lot of hope that Annamie Paul would be the person to bring the Greens into the mainstream and help them win big in the next federal election. And it's been less than a year since that victory, but she's already facing serious challenges to her leadership. Last week, Jenica Atwin, one of just 3 sitting Green MPs, defected to the Liberals. This is a huge deal, and many people inside the party have been blaming Annamie Paul and calling on her to resign. But on Wednesday evening, she fired back and accused some of her party's executive of trying to subvert the will of the party members.
And even though I was given a strong mandate just over half a year ago directly from our members, a small group of councillors sought to force a vote of non-confidence in my leadership. They did so with no substantive consultation with the members they represent. They produced a list of allegations that were so racist, so sexist, that they were immediately disavowed by both of our MPs as offensive and inflammatory and contrary to party ethics, and I thank our MPs for that. The plan of this small group of councillors, who are on their way out, did not succeed.
She had a message for the Prime Minister, too.
To the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, I say to you today, you are no ally and you are no feminist.
But what happened in the last couple of weeks is actually just the tip of the iceberg, and this has been months in the making.
Some members of the party believe that this is a question about the heart and purpose of the party, and that this is a question of what the party stands for.
Marieke Walsh is a political reporter in Ottawa for the Globe and Mail, and she's been following the Greens' implosion this week. Today on The Decibel, why Annamie Paul is facing the prospect of being kicked out as leader, and what this says about the Green Party. Hey, Marieke.
Hi, Tamara.
So we're talking on Wednesday morning, and this is a developing story, but I think we can start at a place that is not going to change, which is the defection of Jenica Atwin. So can you start by telling me who she is and why she crossed the floor to join the Liberals?
Of course. Jenica Atwin is the MP for Fredericton in New Brunswick. Until last week, she was the Green Party's MP for Fredericton, and now she is the Liberal Party's MP for Fredericton. And defections happen from time to time, especially in a minority government. But I think that when you're a party of 3 sitting MPs, a defection is that much more painful and powerful and has that much more impact for the party that is affected. And because the sitting MPs, Elizabeth May and Paul Manley, who are the 2 remaining MPs with the Green Party, blame Annamie Paul for Jenica Atwin's defection, this really immediately turned into a test of leadership that has been blown open in the last few days.
And why did Jenica Atwin defect?
So Jenica Atwin says that she defected over communications challenges and a communications breakdown with Annamie Paul. She told CTV News that that was in large part due to this dispute she had over the party's position on the conflict between Israel and Hamas. And she criticized Annamie Paul's statement on the conflict in May, saying it was totally inadequate, suggesting it was too soft on Israel. And she went so far as to suggest that Israel is an apartheid state and was committing human rights abuses. She also said, for example, that there are no 2 sides in this issue, and she supports Palestine. In response, Annamie Paul's senior aide, Noah Zatzman, went onto Facebook a few days later to call out unnamed Green MPs for what he called anti-Semitism and to say he would work to defeat them, which is something that you don't see in politics. You don't see a political aide advocating for the ouster of sitting MPs. And Annamie Paul did not comment on Mr. Zatzman's comments. He is no longer in her office, but she has never given her perspective on the issue. And that is really where we are today, is that the Greens now want to see her disavow Zatzman's comments and to stand in solidarity with the two remaining Green Party members who are in the House of Commons.
Right. And Jenica Atwin says that this aide's Facebook post and the fact that Annamie Paul didn't really repudiate it basically left her in an untenable position, and that's why she decided to cross the floor.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And Annamie Paul, instead of engaging on that issue, which she has really tried not to touch, says that Jenica Atwin was looking at this move before this dispute happened in May. That's not something that Jenica Atwin or the Liberal Party has confirmed, but they also won't tell us when they actually started talking.
Okay, so things have really escalated, as you've mentioned, and we've gone from this defection to the possibility of a non-confidence motion in Annamie Paul's leadership, which could ultimately result in her being kicked out as the leader of the party. So how did we get from that to this? How did that happen?
I think the first sort of salvo in this dispute leading to Annamie Paul being in this position actually came from Elizabeth May and Paul Manley, who on the record placed the blame for Jenica Atwin's defection with Annamie Paul. And they did that very soon after. Then over the weekend, we saw the Quebec wing of the Green Party call for Annamie Paul's immediate resignation. That was followed by the Quebec Green Party leaders' call for her resignation on Tuesday. And we are seeing this sort of blow up with some members calling for it. And it ended up being that some members of the federal council, that's sort of the party's executive, requesting a non-confidence vote on Annamie Paul's leadership. And that was what was discussed on Tuesday night at a very lengthy meeting that went late into the night.
And just for our listeners, Elizabeth May is the former head of the Green Party.
Exactly. And that's what adds to the complexity of this. Annamie Paul is replacing a leader who has been the heart, soul, and face of the party for 13 years. And clearly that has challenges, especially in a pandemic when it's more difficult to make those connections, to establish yourself when everybody's distanced. There is no meetings, there is no gatherings going on.
So the interesting thing is that Jenica Atwin changed her stance on Israel less than a week after she defected. So she put out a statement saying that she regretted if her choice of words caused harm. She said Palestinians are suffering. Israelis are also suffering, as well as their loved ones in Canada and around the world. So do you think her defection was actually about the party's stance on Israel? And I guess we should also mention that she's defected to the Liberals, who basically have the same stance on Israel as Annamie Paul.
That's right. And I think that's one of the head scratchers this week is Jenica Atwin said she was leaving the party on principle last week, that she was going to a party that essentially held a very similar policy to what Annamie Paul stated that became the issue. I think you could point to that and say, oh, it's not about that. But I think this is more one of those questions of process and the fact that she was in a party that appeared to be advocating for her ouster. And now, in response, that party is considering Annamie Paul's ouster.
Okay, so Annamie Paul is now facing this challenge to her leadership as a result of this defection. But this seems to be the straw that broke the camel's back in a sense, because she's been struggling to find her footing as the leader since she was elected, from what I understand. She's a novice politician who came in as the leader after Elizabeth May. And before we even talk about the challenges that she's been dealing with, can you remind me who Annamie Paul is and how did she win the leadership race back in October of last year?
For sure. Annamie Paul is a political novice, but somebody who was heralded as a real disruptor on the federal stage when she won her leadership race last year. And she was seen as a breath of fresh air by partisans across the political spectrum, and really as a potential threat to other progressive parties, namely the NDP and the Liberals. But she did not have a seat in the House of Commons, which is a huge challenge for incoming leaders because it makes it more, you have less visibility, it makes it harder for you to have that established relationship with your caucus, and also to have that power because you are not actually one of the ones holding a vote on policy. On top of that, she was replacing Elizabeth May, who essentially, that name is synonymous with the Green Party in Canada. And it is a huge culture change to go from one leader for more than a decade to a new leader who is also a political novice and who is a less known commodity. And that has clearly had some intense growing pains, with the Toronto Star reporting earlier this year that she faced sexism and racism while making the transition to being a leader, and that she faced serious challenges and barriers within the party to establish herself and even to campaign for the by-election that she ran in last year.
So the other thing I wanted to highlight was that she won this leadership race very narrowly, right? Like she won in the 8th round of voting, and she defeated Dimitri Lascaris, who is this lawyer from Montreal. He bills himself as an eco-socialist. And I wonder if you can talk a bit about the ideological split within the party and I guess the narrow way that she ended up coming out on top in this leadership race.
Absolutely. And yes, she did come out with a significant margin, about 9 or 10 points separating her and Dimitri Lascaris, but it was, as you mentioned, on the 8th round of voting. So it was not exactly a decisive win. And I think what we are seeing is this debate that dominated the Green Party's leadership race of, are we going to be a party of activists on the margins of the federal political scene, but, sticking with our conscience, or are we going to become mainstream or more mainstream in order to gain more votes and hopefully gain more seats in the House of Commons? That was really the underlying debate of that leadership race, and people believe that debate was decided with the election of Annamie Paul. And what we are seeing, I think, is that debate is continuing and being revived with these issues.
Yeah. So for people who don't really follow the Green Party, how would you describe the cultural divide that's happening within the party right now?
I think that they are still trying to figure out who their audience is and what their goal is. Is their audience activists, or is their audience the average voter with a minivan and kids and many other pressures? I spoke with one person on the more activist side of the party on Tuesday night who said, they view the party as one of the only voices on the federal stage in Canada that is taking a hard stance against Israel, and they view that as a valuable thing. Whereas if you are thinking about being a mainstream party, that would not be the issue that you would be championing with voters in Canada.
So there have been reports for months now of party infighting and challenges to Annamie Paul's leadership, and what we're seeing now seems to be a culmination of that. So can you tell me about the nature of the opposition that she's faced within the party?
I think that you almost go back to right before she was elected, where Elizabeth May told the Toronto Star that she wouldn't close the door on one day again being leader. Mm-hmm. If Elizabeth May is leaving open the door almost as a tease to members that she could come back, then it's very difficult for a new leader who's already trying to replace very big shoes in the Green Party movement to really have the credibility to establish themselves. We saw reporting in other news outlets that some people believed Elizabeth May was still holding on to the party structure within the party's organization and trying to control the party. Her husband, John Kidder, was on the executive. He has since stepped down. Elizabeth May has denied this, but then when my colleague Ian Bailey asked Elizabeth May if she supported Annamie Paul still in the leadership, she would not say yes. And in fact, she called on Annamie Paul to apologize to Jenica Atwin and to try and win Jenica Atwin back. And so Annamie Paul's credibility is being undercut by her own party right now. And people see that as a continuation of the challenges she had getting support and funding for her by-election race. People see that as the challenges she had, as the Toronto Star reported, that it took her a while to actually get her salary contract with the party because as a non-sitting MP, she doesn't have a salary from Parliament.
And you mentioned also that she's the first Black woman to lead the party, and you have to wonder how race plays into the opposition that she's been facing. So what have you been hearing about that?
I think that is a very serious concern for many people. When the Green Party ran in the 2019 election, they had the least diverse slate of candidates of any of the federal parties. And Annamie Paul's election as leader made international headlines for the symbolic move that it was and for the historic breakthrough that it was seen to represent. And we had our own reporting from Aaron Anderson on Annamie Paul's election that she faced racism during the leadership race. The Global News has reported that she faced anti-Semitism during the leadership race. And I think it's more and more accepted that that is part of the daily lived experience for Black people in Canada. And so you can't separate her identity from this experience, and certainly her supporters have not separated that. Operation Black Vote, which is a multi-partisan group that aims to increase representation of Black people at all levels of government, actually released a statement on Tuesday to say that she is being treated differently than other party leaders in Canada and than her predecessor. And so this is something that Annamie Paul actually herself in her press conference on Tuesday also called out. She made a statement about her identity as a Black woman and as a Jewish woman when she was talking about this attack from the Liberal Party.
That they are willing to sow division, that they are willing to encourage people to turn against their beliefs, that they will essentially stop at almost nothing in order to secure this majority, even if it means suppressing the views of their newest member, even if it means going after the first Black and Jewish woman to be elected to this role, even if it means...
But she's also a new politician, and like, how much do you think that is a factor in how she's been struggling to command the respect of the party?
I think that transitioning to partisan politics, even with a party that says it doesn't whip the votes and that it is democratic in its policy making, is a massive change that we have seen other leaders also struggle with. Most recently, Jagmeet Singh, when he became the NDP leader, he also faced discontent in the ranks before he got a seat in the House of Commons. And we see that Annamie Paul is still trying to find her sea legs in this partisan political world. There was a comment she made at the press conference on Tuesday that belied a bit of naivete about the sometimes vicious game of politics. She, decried the Liberal Party's attempts to undercut her leadership, which is what every party does to leaders of other parties.
Is that we have heard from the Liberals' own mouths over the last few days that this was a deliberate, dastardly act by them to sow division between us. This was intended to kneecap us in key ridings in places that they know they need to win if they want their majority.
And so I think that was a bit of a window into her adjustment to partisan politics that is very challenging for many people, and it takes time. And I think the fact that she is running in a riding that is not seen as winnable for the Green Party in downtown Toronto that has just been a stronghold for the Liberals for so long is another example of how she might be making it more difficult for herself to actually gain a foothold into federal partisan politics.
Right. And why is she insisting on running in that riding as opposed to somewhere that might be easier for the Greens to win?
It's a riding that she says she has roots in. It's a riding that she ran in previously. They viewed her success in the by-election where she received about 30% of the vote as a real sort of sense of momentum that she could maybe build on in a general election. But by-elections are very different beasts than general elections. And even people within her own party have told me that, you know, they place her chances of winning as under 5%. And so really, for her to win Toronto Centre in the next election, the stars would just have to line up in such a remarkable way. And the Liberal Party would have to all of a sudden really be on the down and outs with voters for that turnaround to happen.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that race unfolds.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note as well that she is joining the Green Party when expectations are so high. The party was hoping in 2019 to really make an impact, and they saw that they had the chance of getting official party status. And they fell well short of that. And Elizabeth May still tried to make it look like a win, but she still quit. And so Annamie Paul is joining the party when expectations are high. It's very different than when Elizabeth May took over at the party when they were still not seen as a major player on the federal scene. And Elizabeth May also lost by-elections, and she also had to find her sea legs, but the spotlight was much less intense at the time, I think is fair to say.
So this is all really interesting, and like usually you don't hear about the Green Party too much because they only have 3 MPs, but I feel like over the last few months, every story that I've read about the Green Party has been about how ugly things have gotten internally, and it's now being aired out so publicly. And I wonder what you make of that and how public this mess has become.
It again goes to this question of what their goals are as a party and who they want to be. On the issue of the Middle East, some members of the party believe that this is a question about the heart and purpose of the party, and that this is a question of what the party stands for. And politics aside, this needs to be sorted out now and can't just be swept under the rug in the name of political expediency. And there will need to be, the political lens of this coming right ahead of an election, questioning your leader, questioning the entire operation of the party in a way, only serves to undercut this party and serves to benefit the NDP and the Liberals. Nobody in the Green Party is winning from having this debate aired if their goal is to win more seats in the federal election.
Okay, Marieke, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's it for today. I'm Tamara Khandaker. Our producers are Madeline White and Kasia Mihailovich. David Crosby edits the show. Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thanks so much to Marieke Walsh. You can find her on Twitter at Marieke Walsh. If you like this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you haven't already done it, follow us wherever you're listening to this so you never miss an episode. If you want to reach us, you can email thedecibel@theglobeandmail.com or find me on Twitter at Anima_TK. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.